2, 1.
Welcome to part 2 of the Cole Porter lecture. As I said, I want to talk a little bit more about Porter's work with this section. And we'll kind of use 2 major shows, Anything Goes and Kiss Me Kate, as examples of that. There are some very, very key trademarks to a Porter composition. And I've got some of them listed here, and you'll probably in your research come across a few more. In general, a Cole Porter song is associated with the sort of dash, the sort of panache of 30s jazz and swing that, you know, a fellow in a tuxedo who can toss his hat onto the hook and have it land perfectly and kind of keep walking. This is hat and cane kind of tap dancing material. Porter was fascinated with Latin rhythm and with bossa nova rhythm. Again, coming back to this business of the time signature of songs, where a waltz goes 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. Some of these rhythms would do things like and 1, 2, 2, and 2, 2, 2, and 3, 2, 2, and 4, 2, 2, and things like that. And Porter felt that by incorporating these rhythms, he could have something that made people stand up and take notice and listen. Very unusual wordplay. Most people believe that Porter is one of the best, if not the best, American lyricist. Stephen Sondheim, the only other person people argue is the best American lyricist, he says he learned everything from Porter. An awful lot of times Porter was considered by some critics in his own time almost to be too smart for his own good. He had an audience that consisted of college intelligentsia, of folks that sort of enjoyed the more off-the-fringe style of music. And people felt that, oh, all of this cleverness, all of these rhymes, all of these long and intricate phrases that force you to pay attention to the lyrics as opposed to just the tune, that this was just asking too much of a theater audience. They kind of got proven wrong because it's been very, you know, it's proven to stay throughout the ages as classic stuff. I gotta tell you, Porter never met a dirty joke he didn't like. And if you think that something in a Cole Porter song sounds dirty, it probably is. An awful lot of his work concerns double entendre. He was tickled, he was amused with the idea that he could write a song and that it could feature something absolutely filthy, and at the same time it would be very hard for anyone to prove that that was his intention. In this way he was sort of a rebel, and he also, by the way, had alternate lyrics to many of his songs which were much more unapologetically dirty. And he would entertain at some of his parties with sort of R and X-rated versions of some of his lyrics. But double entendre, even in its subtlest form, even if it's something just very, very faint, is very much a Porter thing. And he enjoys the idea. He almost feels like he's put one over on people if he's managed to present something in one context that looks like another. There are a lot of topical allusions and references in Cole Porter. Another thing critics said was that perhaps his music wouldn't last because it was full of references to people and places that were contemporary to Porter himself. The names of other celebrities, the names of other shows, the names of characters. He refers, just in You're the Top, one of the songs that I'm going to link so that you get to hear in our module, we hear references to Mahatma Gandhi and Mickey Mouse and a variety of products and a variety of people, Greta Garbo, and it's just one topical allusion after another, but he manages to make them all into one cohesive set of lyrics. And finally, there's a notion of self-deprecation in Porter. And to that I mean that an awful lot of the characters singing, so to speak, in a Cole Porter song usually predicates it with, I'm not worthy to love you, but, or what you're about to hear, my song is going to be really poorly written, but here it is. Of course, sometimes he does that and then he goes on, much as Shakespeare does, to do quite the opposite. And he's kind of set the bar low for himself on purpose. But he does that also, and many have speculated that it's Porter himself, because he did suffer from a great deal of a lot of self-esteem issues and a lot of personal issues with his own view of himself and his own view of love, as it is. All of this comes together with a number of successful musicals. The two that I was talking about earlier, we've got Anything Goes from 1934, and then post-accident, we've got Kiss Me Kate from 48. Some of you out there, when you have participated in our discussions, for whatever reason, you stumbled upon P.G. Wodehouse. And here's a spot where we could talk about P.G. Wodehouse again. Yes, you're absolutely correct. He was a lyricist for a number of successful musicals in the 30s. He also was the creator of the comic character Jeeves, who appears in a lot of comic novels. Eventually, someone would write a musical about Jeeves, by the way, kind of bringing the whole thing full circle. And he was friends with folks like Cole Porter, and it was Porter writing back and forth to him across the pond from the United States over to England saying, I have these ideas, you should contribute them. Together with another writer named Guy Bolton, they wound up writing the script and the plot to Anything Goes. The plot to Anything Goes actually is a very confusing, mixed up, madcap sort of affair. And that has a little bit to do with how and the circumstances under which it was written. Many of you could have been involved in a production of Anything Goes. And here's the strange, peculiar thing about Cole Porter. Because he was such a perfectionist, and because he was the type that would take such little regard for his own work, but such high regard for getting things just right, you might have done a version of Anything Goes with a song in it called Heaven Hop. And your friend might have been in a production of Anything Goes with a song in it called Let's Step Out. Sometimes Porter would rewrite scripts. Sometimes he would take songs out. Sometimes a song that he thought was particularly good would turn up subsequently in another Cole Porter show all over again. He had no problem about doing that. But as a result, there's a lot of versions out there of Porter's work. Also, his shows get revived and rewritten quite often. And in the case of Anything Goes, the script itself was rather thrown together. I suppose I keep referring to that, so I might as well tell you that story. Anything Goes started out as supposed to be a play about a shipwreck and about the effect that that would have on these screwball characters. The idea there'd be all these wealthy people that didn't even know how to do basic functions of life, and all of their servants who knew. And the servants would become more important on this desert island where everybody was stranded. And Porter was in the United States putting music together for it. And Mr. Wodehouse, Guy Bolton, a couple of other writers, Howard Lindsay and Russell Crouse, some other people, a lot of people working on the script. Now, in 1934, a ship called the Morro Castle, it went up in flames off the coast of New Jersey, and 134 people were killed. This is a telegram from Cole Porter to P.G. Wodehouse. P.G., shipwreck no longer funny. Must rewrite. So it didn't seem like the right material for humor, and the piece was supposed to open very, very quickly. So the authors hurriedly called in a couple more people, Lindsay and Krause, and they frantically rewrote the text. And they rewrote it into a new story where the ship took off, just took a general cruise, came home, and it was more about the events that took place on the ship. As a result, if you look at the script, it's kind of all over the place even today. It features a couple of plots. The major plot has to do with a nightclub singer who has become an evangelist, and she has a nightclub act about religion. It has to do with a young man whose girlfriend is going to marry this particularly drippy and unappealing person, so the young man is a stowaway on the ship to try to talk his girlfriend out of that. And it consists of a man who's on the lam from the law, who is public enemy number 13. And he's kind of mad that he's only public enemy number 13, and he keeps trying to think if he can do more evil things to get into the top 10, but his heart isn't really in it. And during the cruise, he's in disguise as a Catholic priest. And the humor comes, of course, from everybody coming around and having him sort of have to act benign and friendly and all that stuff when he's not just with his basic cohorts. The show itself sort of teeters all over the place, but the score is just a mine of riches. You may have heard I Get a Kick Out of You, the song that Frank Sinatra turned into a big swing hit. In the show, it has that more Latin bossa nova sound, and if you go hunting for another version of it, you may find that. Blow, Gabriel, Blow. There is a song with a title about getting on one's knees that Mr. Porter wrote about the horn of Gabriel in heaven, and it is the evangelist, Reno Sweeney, talking about how when Gabriel blows his horn, we should all get on our knees and wait for the heavenly reward. And You're the Top, which is a song, again, that I've connected to our unit here, where characters just sort of compliment each other by saying that there's some great thing and then another, and there are troves of alternate lyrics to You're the Top. It's one of the songs that Porter played with and wrote with again and again and again. Anything Goes has become sort of a standard, although, like I said, it tends to get written and rewritten and then written some more. But the songs that are so wildly popular, and they really are indicative of the Porter style, perhaps more than any other. And I highly recommend it. It's not a bad novel. It's not a bad score if you pick up the score. And the script, on the other hand, leaves a little bit to be desired. It's a show that we did here at the college some years ago with some success. The other show that I mentioned Kiss Me Kate from 1948. In this case, this is after the Porter accident. This one is a little more challenging vocally. It almost borders on operetta at times. The book is by a couple, Bella and Sam Spiewak, who were very successful humorists in the 40s. And they take some of their inspiration from, of all things, William Shakespeare. It's a little bit of an adaptation of Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. The play, the musical, is sort of a play within a play, because it's about a cast of people putting on a production of Taming of the Shrew, and the main actors in it are having their own marital problems, which parallel those of the characters a little bit. Kiss Me Kate is one of a handful of musical comedies that enters the select circle of shows with 1,000 or more performances. It opened in 1948 and ran for 1,097 shows. It contains, among other things, songs like So in Love, Were Thine That Special Face, an amusing takeoff on the continental operetta type of waltz called Wunderbar. You also hear songs like I Hate Men, Too Darn Hot, Brush Up Your Shakespeare, a lot of songs that are very familiar to people as pop culture iconic songs in and of their own right. And Kiss Me Kate is one of those shows that it was actually very recently successfully revived on Broadway. It's one of those shows that really holds up rather well in subsequent performances. Those shows are pretty much the best two examples, but certainly not the only examples of Cole Porter's shows. I do believe, though, that Porter, much like Berlin, is probably more recognizable for individual songs and compositions as opposed to full scores. You know? Porter's life has been brought to film a couple of times, and I think one of my favorite anecdotes here is that there was a film made in the 1940s called Night and Day, which is one of Porter's songs. It cast Cary Grant as Cole Porter. And Porter, in his own very typically bitter, manic, self-destructive, sarcastic way, was invited to a showing of it. The film, because of Hollywood production code kind of ethics during that time period, does not portray Cole Porter as gay. Oh no. Porter goes up to Linda Thomas's husband and punches him in the nose. And he's not her husband. He's just a guy that she knows. And then Porter says no to many girls who want a piece of him because he's true to Linda and because he's so devoted to his music. Porter goes into the army, but he goes into the army as a fighter, taking, grenade pins out with his teeth and blowing things up. Porter is portrayed as a hard businessman. A lot of it is just, it's a very heterosexual Cole Porter, and it's a very sanitized Cole Porter's life. And Porter's reaction to it was to laugh hysterically and kind of sarcastically ask them, would you show it again? Come on. They had to sort of wheel him out and take him away before he did the production any damage. Many years later, and after Porter's death, you might have heard of a film called DeLovely, which starred Kevin Kline. It was a Miramax picture just in the last decade or so, and that is a much more accurate portrayal of Porter's life. It does include his more complicated social life, his bitter self-loathing over his physical condition, and his complicated relationship with his wife. Plus, it touches on his work. One of the interesting things about DeLovely is that it also featured a soundtrack in which a number of contemporary, at the time, artists were asked to cover Cole Porter songs, and also in most cases using only instruments and styles of orchestration that would have been available to them at Cole Porter's time in the 30s. And it really kind of shows. You get artists like Sheryl Crow and Elvis Costello and a couple of other people kind of doing very standard versions of Cole Porter's songs. And I think I'm also probably going to link one of those to this module as well, so you'll get to hear a bit of that. Porter loves, as I said, to make up his own lyrics in some cases, words like DeLovely, if they fit. He loves to utilize whatever makes a word rhyme. His knowledge of the language, of the French language, probably from his time in the French army, is very evident, because if he can't find a word that rhymes in English, he will find a word in French, and he will use that phrase instead. His life mirrors his work in a very, very tragic way, and he's certainly one of those people that I really believe would have led a completely different life if he were born just even a few decades later. And it's a pretty tragic one, especially the fact that he was in such denial and in such seclusion and in the throes of addiction for so much of his life toward the end. So it's not the happiest story. But that is the story nonetheless. It's a courageous one at times, and he gives us some music that a lot of people really, really appreciate. Attached to this module today will be another discussion where I'll ask you to find a Cole Porter song and maybe comment on how it features some of the trademarks that we talked about today, and whether or not it seems to fit some of the descriptions we've talked about. And there will be another quiz coming up as well, so keep an eye out for that. Please continue to email me with any questions and concerns. Thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you next time.